people are losing faith in politics. People are losing faith in democracy. We've essentially created a system that's so artificial that nobody's really comfortable in it anymore. This case should have just shut down the whole system. I don't know how not more people are talking about it.
People need a segue to action. If we don't talk about what is next, like what is the alternative that we want to build, people just feel like, yeah, but then I can't do anything about it. I'm helpless.
We're living in a world that most people feel like we don't want anymore. How did we get here?
I lost my backbone somewhere in Stockholm.
Hej Allihopa, and welcome to Somewhere in Stockholm, a podcast production by Experience Stockholm. I'm Frankie, your host, and as usual, we like to discuss all kinds of topics under the Swedish sun. And we try to bring guests that tend to be looking for new audiences to tap into the causes and movements that they're coordinating and organizing on the ground here in the Stockholm region. So we're very excited to bring you a new guest today. I would like to welcome Fatima Osman Abdalla to the podcast. Fatima, welcome. Fatima has had a huge variety of different career moves. She was a political scientist, also got her law degree from Stockholm University, and now works as a communications project manager at the intersection of climate justice, social justice, and systems change. After graduating from law school in 2020, she developed a particular interest in legal philosophy and rights of nature, and has since focused on bridging collective resilience, personal well-being, and our relationship with the living world. She's here today as the co-founder of The Real Economy, who she co-founded with Helena Norberg-Hodge, and also with Gustaf Skarsgård as spokesperson for this initiative. And The Real Economy calls for a more human-centric, accountable, and regenerative economic system. So I'm very excited to be talking about all of this. And since this is a podcast where we like to highlight different stories from Stockholm and from people who either grew up here or who have established their lives here, I'm wondering if there's any kind of background you can introduce us to about who you are and what brings you to this world of economics, political science. How did you first get excited about these ideas? Can be something from your childhood or something more recent. We would love to hear a little bit more of your background and how you tapped into these new ideas.
As you said, I have my background in law, and I always had a very deep question of, what is justice? How can we understand justice? And in Sweden, when you go to law school, they have this big blue book that you're supposed to learn. And they tell you that here's the legal method. And if you know it well, you're able to, be an advocate for justice. But I always felt like there was a missing element for me. As I finished, I was kind of disillusioned because there was something I wasn't really able to put my finger on, but it's this sense of like, we all know what justice feels like, and we all know what injustice feels like. So there was a more embodied expression, I think, of justice that I was seeking. And so luckily I had a sense of kinship with some of the people I studied with, and I met other law students that were kind of asking the same questions as I was. So when I finished law school, as I said, I was quite disillusioned, and I worked as a producer, I worked as a project manager, I worked as a lawyer for a while in a little firm. But I ended up working most recently in a place called Fältbiologerna, which is like the daughter organization of Naturskyddsföreningen. And I've been working with, how to help young people where they live influence environmental policy. And I also have been having this education for young people at a think tank where I work, which is supposed to help young people engage in political discourse. But what I kept seeing in my work, in working with young people, is people are losing faith in politics, people are losing faith in democracy. A lot of statistics show that young people don't even believe in democracy anymore. And there's really like this feeling of, do we have power in our own lives? Mm-hmm. And so for me, I was writing a report for the think tank. And I started exploring this idea of decentralization. Like, how can we take back the power that's really been monopolized into the hands of very few people that are at the top of, the wealth creation, and that are unelected, making very important decisions now, as we can see with technology as well. How can we take power back so that people actually have real influence over their own lives? We have human scale economies where we can see the impact of our actions. And so I came across this term localization, which was really interesting to me. And one of the pioneers was Helena Norberg-Hodge. And I was just like, who is this woman? She's been working with this for decades. She's been working about relocalizing, about limiting the transnational banks and corporations. She's Swedish, but nobody really knows about her. And then when I found out more about the essence of what this movement is saying, for me, deeply spiritual, but also really connected the dots for me in my own political thinking about how we've essentially created a system that's so artificial that nobody's really comfortable in it anymore. And we can see it with our own eyes. We can barely breathe the air. The food we eat is toxic. The water is polluted. People are feeling isolated. We've lost a sense of, feeling connected within ourselves. And I really don't think it's anybody's fault. I think it's just that we're all running faster and faster to be able to provide for our own lives. So linking the dots between how not just unsustainable, but fundamentally unrealistic the economic system we have today is. And then also starting to see that, okay, there are many voices that have been talking about decentralization that have been also very marginalized because it's really threatening to the big corporate system to talk about this. So that excited me, and we just released that report a few days ago called in Swedish Jorden mitt hem, which means the earth, my home. And that started a journey for me with Helena, where we started discussing this idea of launching a platform called the Real Economy. And that came from, as I was talking to Helena, she would always refer to, the real economy, the real economy. And I was just like, what do you mean with the real economy? And she was like, it's the living earth, of course, every single thing we need, everything comes from the earth. The sofa, the microphone, the clothes we wear, everything. But we don't really see that because we have a globalized system where our food and our clothes are produced from the other side of the world by people in slave-like conditions. So this aspect of relationality, as I would call it, was missing. So we decided to focus this campaign on the free trade system, and I'd love more questions on that, and in specific, something called the ISDS clause, which for me is really like, as Gustaf always says, like the acupressure point. It's so specific, but when you take a deeper look, it kind of shows how the whole big picture and everything is interconnected. And it's really one of the key mechanisms through which the global corporations have been able to amass more and more power, more and more wealth, and just keep this machine going that continues to exploit. And now they want more resources from the deep sea all the way to Mars. They're continuing to extract, and the free trade treaties facilitate this. And it's been a process of, ever since the first traders set out, not the first traders, there was trade before the East India Trading Company, but when the European Empire set out to colonize the rest of the world, they began this system of very asymmetrical trade, which really was about extracting resources from other parts of the world. They'd done this at home first through what was called the enclosures movement, where they enclosed a lot of land from people that had been living very land-based lives before, and said, you need to go into the cities. That's where all the jobs is. You need, to work in these factories, these mines, in the cotton fields. and live in these high rise. And yeah, so that was kind of the beginning. Please
So there was definitely a push for urbanization.
Yeah.
I'm not going to deny that.
Yeah.
But we're talking a little bit beyond that. It was the fact that people no longer were working their own land and farming their own land and farming their own products, and that is where the disconnect first began. Is that what you were saying?
I can't make a claim as to where the disconnect first began. I don't know. But what I'm saying is that with that enclosures movement, which was fundamentally about removing people from how had been living for thousands of years in connection to the land. So it wasn't just a disruption in the livelihoods of people, which had been on these, more diversified farms. It was also a disruption in the relationships people had with the land, with the animals, with, just the ways in which the cultural settings worked. And when this was done in Africa and West Africa, even from a spiritual standpoint, before they were taken across the ocean, the people had shrines that they were attending to, the ecological, spiritual relationship that they had with the waters, with the mountains. In that cosmology was maintaining a kind of ecological balance. So there was a really deep rupture in this kind of relationality that people had, which was an earth-based, practice all over the world.
Mm-hmm. So I hear you in this need to create a bond between people and planet once again, that we are part of nature. We are not, it's not us versus nature, or nature is...
Can I correct you?
Yeah.
We don't need to create a bond between people and planet. And there is an irrevocable bond between people and earth and people and planet. What we need to do is to really stop the system that keeps on interrupting that bond and keeps us feeling like we are separate from the earth, that keeps us feeling isolated from one another, and doesn't allow us to see the fact that by nature, we are dependent on the trees, we are dependent on the waters, and they are dependent on us. And that interdependence can look different, right? It can look like a relationship of mutual respect. It can look like a relationship of deep listening, or it can look like, well, we are polluting everything, and that's why we have this toxic air. So the bond, we don't need to do anything. We maybe just need to remember the fact that the bond is there, and then be very clear about pinpointing what structures are we supporting that are man-made, artificial, that keep on isolating us from our, very natural birthright to be children of the earth, so to speak.
Yeah. If I may, I wanna maybe take a step back here to talk a little bit about, in preparing for starting the real economy. I'm assuming, since you found Helena through your research, through your studies, I guess. Did you also have to do any preparation in order to start an initiative like this? Because I went to check your website and you have real policy actions on there.
Yeah.
You talked a little bit about the free trade agreements, and we can dwell a little bit more on that. But I'm wondering, how do you then decide, okay, now I have this information, I'm aware that this is the case. I understand that we want to keep that connection to the earth that you're saying is pre-existent, very strong. But then how do you then take the next step, which is how do you take that into action and policy? So how did you pick the policy key actions that you picked, and why those and not others? So if maybe you can speak a little bit more about those.
So what happened was, when I interviewed Helena, and I was wondering about this whole localization movement, and I asked her, what is the single most important thing for us to talk about when we think about localization? And I thought she was going to tell me about her experiences in Ladakh with indigenous people, about the beauty of getting our hands in the dirt and healing with the earth. But then she said, we really need to think about the free trade treaties. And I was kind of confused about that at first, because I had some understanding of it because of my time in law school. I had an understanding of the construct of free trade and the idea that since after the Second World War, you wanted to integrate economic activity across the world between countries. So you shouldn't discriminate companies because they're from different regions. It should be free to trade wherever. And she told me about something called the ISDS clause, which just sounds so boring when you think about, like, when you hear it, and it sounds so dry. But when I heard about it, I just couldn't grasp that this was really something that was happening, because it's completely absurd. It's basically the right for global corporations to sue governments because of any policies or laws that they enact that can limit the profit of the corporations. And it just, for me, it was so hard to wrap, because I know there's so many different things happening, and why would you pick this and not that? And, we have the bottom sea trolling, and we have the fracking, and we have all of these like slave-like conditions in Congo. Why are you focusing on ISDS, right? Because what I could see was that this was really such a deep expression of how much power our governments have handed over to the global corporations. And when you look at the whole free trade system, it's really a new neo-colonial system that's allowing for all these other extractive industries to keep on going. And it's also facilitating the data centers now. So it's kind of like, okay, we have all of these issues over here, and I see how the free trade system and also these ISDS clauses, because if our governments want to enact anything to protect people from toxic air, for clean water, to raise the minimum wage, they will be reluctant in doing so because they know they can be sued by these global corporations. So it has this, it's kind of like puts a lid on so many regulations that would be so important for us now to take as a society in order to try to do something about the predicament that we're in. But the cases are so, the lawsuits are so expensive. So even if a country just gets sued, it doesn't mean they have to win, but just the fact of getting sued means you could lose a lot of money. So it has something that's called the regulatory chill. So when Helena told me about this, I was just like, okay, I see that. It was like things just clicked for me, and I could see how there's been this creation of like this global economic empire that's not elected by anyone. It's not accountable to people anywhere. It keeps on disrupting our relationship to the land where we live. And it's really operating in the shadows. When people wanted emancipation from the British Empire or the Spanish Empire, there was a clear structure that they were protesting against. But this global empire, it's been what one of the journalists that we've been following calls a silent coup. So my reaction was, okay, I know a little, but I don't know enough to go out and, make a campaign about this. But what I can do is I can go out and talk to people. I can talk to journalists. I can talk to people in academia. I can talk to politicians, and I'm going to ask questions about this ISDS thing, because honestly, I can't understand that not more people are talking about it. So what I found, so I decided, like, with the help of Helena, I'm going to do a project, a citizen-led call, where I'm going to go out and say, hey, I'm not a politician, I'm not a journalist, I'm just a citizen of a supposedly democratic country, which has very good reason to believe that we have an extremely colonial system that nobody is talking about, that keeps on giving more and more power in the hands of very few. So I'm just going to ask questions, I'm going to document what I do, and I'm going to share this information with me. But the problem was, as I went out and started doing these interviews, I was, in Brussels, I was in Riksdagshuset here, I talked to journalists. What I could find was,
please, do you want to help keep this podcast alive? Then please subscribe today. Thank you very much.
Very few people had adequate information about ISDS. B, the people that did know about it, nobody can justify it. Not one person I talked to could justify the fact that we have our politicians signing in black and white that global corporations can sue us because we want to enact policies that are for the benefit for the planet and people. So it put me in a bit of a weird predicament because I wanted to do this, come along, let's find out more information. But there was a lot of ignorance about the ISDS clauses. So it just came to a point where we felt like, okay, we need to have a very strong non-compliance campaign where we say we don't consent to this anymore. We can't give more power. From left and right politically, we're all supporting this globalized system, knowingly or unknowingly. And so that's I guess that's kind of how it started. And I developed somewhat of a, I don't want to use the word obsession, but almost like, how could this be? How can we have this? How can we have this system that's just facilitating so much extraction, so much ill health, and countries are literally paying billions of dollars because they want to do something for the benefit of their people. And through addressing this, we can also highlight this whole big picture with the globalized system of how we've used free trade. I don't know if you know Vandana Shiva, but she calls free trade neo-colonialism because we've been taught to believe that globalization is about diversity, interconnection. We can travel to other countries. We can have working permits here and there. But when you really look at the big picture, globalization has been a process of granting global corporations more and more power. Because if we were to have true interconnection, that would be not having people in slave-like conditions in Congo making our mobile phones. That's not interconnection.
Mm-hmm.
That's free trade globalization.
I want to touch on a few points because you gave us a lot of information here. And I think for the audience, it's good to not only play a little devil's advocate, but actually try to understand what are the real obstacles in the way of potentially getting rid of this clause, or even breaking down this big sort of corporate overhaul that we have over our nations and our policies. So I have a question here that came up for me, which was, why not? You're mentioning having this campaign for awareness and for, sensitization of the population that this is a real problem. This is the reason why we don't have policies that actually help us. But why not approach this from the legal point of view? Like, why not go and try to, chip away at these contracts and at these, because you studied law. So I would assume that background would have benefited you. Why go this other route of public, engagement rather than, I guess you can do it in the courts, right? So I'm wondering why you thought about that, if that was a consideration for you.
Well, okay, so a few things there. First of all, I would argue that from a legal standpoint, that these clauses are unconstitutional because in Sweden, we have something called folksuveränitetsprincipen, which is the principle of popular sovereignty, which says all power emanates from the people. But if we have a system of a literally corporate veto where CEOs have a veto to publicly mandated decisions, then it's not a democracy.
Exactly.
Mm-hmm. So that there. But the thing is that one of the things that is most problematic about this global economic system is that people have this view that it's almost like a force of nature, like it can't be stopped. I don't know if you've ever heard like globalization is inevitable.
Mm-hmm.
The AI development is inevitable. It's all gonna happen. So you might as well just,
get on board
or
get left behind.
But we need to remember that so many of the very important, civil right movements that we've had, it's always been people. It's always been even, the big people like Gandhi or Mandela. It's been a people's movement. So this idea that we can't change the system, for me, is one of the most problematic things that is a colonization of our minds. It's like, leave it to the experts, leave it to, because we have no say. We're just the people. We can't change things. And I think that's one of the biggest obstacles to change, this belief that we can't change things. And a lot of people will say, one of the lectures we had a few weeks ago, we called it something like ending the global corporate regime. And everyone was like, okay, can you change the name? It sounds so depressing. Talk about localization and local farms instead, because we all know that capitalism is bad. We all know that, you know, the global economic system is not working anymore. We want to talk about something positive. But I would say, no, we actually don't know the extent to the depth of this global corporate system, because if we did, there's no reason for us to accept it. There's no reason that our politicians keep on in a world where virtually all species are going extinct. They still insist on keeping doing the same thing, still insist on we need more minerals, we need to extract more things. So if we're going to have any potential of getting rid of these clauses, we need political mandate. If we're going to get political mandate, we need to pressure our politicians. If we're going to pressure our politicians, we need a people's movement.
Okay,
you get what I mean?
I understand the need for the mindset shift. I'm just saying that...
No, not just the mindset. Okay, so there's the awareness, but we need... So, for example, Colombia recently exited the ISDS treaties. What they did was raise awareness. They got a bunch of civil society organizations to sign a joint statement. After that, they reached out to people within academia, got them to write a joint statement. After that, they could address the politics, because the politicians aren't willing to do anything. They're sleepwalking. So unless they know, we're not going to vote for you anymore if you have these policies, we need to change it, they're not going to change. They're still doing the same formula that they've always been doing. And one thing from a legal standpoint is the clauses are in free trade agreements. That's something that's negotiated by the EU. So we can't even change that. We're not saying we need to exit the EU now, although we can be EU critical. But Sweden has its own bilateral investment treaties, which is between Sweden and other countries. In those, there are ISDS clauses, so Sweden can terminate those treaties. In order to do that, we need political mandate.
Okay, so you're saying that because your entire movement is about localization, that's why you're beginning with Sweden. Because for me, there would be no obstacle to then going to the EU and doing a legal battle from that point of view, from that level, right?
Yeah, the thing is, so what we were thinking is that there is already a global breakaway movement. Colombia has exited the ISDS nationally. Ecuador has started doing the same. South Africa is doing the same. So we want to be a part of that global breakaway strategy where more and more countries start
one country at a time.
Yeah, start realizing the absolute indignity of having these it was really, before countries in Africa and South America started gaining their independence, we had the system that was maintained through armies. But when countries wanted to gain independence, then the empires still wanted to make sure they could extract the resources. So instead, they did it through contracts and things like the ISDS clauses. So it's basically a very, very colonial system that's still maintained through these. So we need countries to start saying that there's absolutely no dignity in having this kind of clause in the treaties, and we need to exit now. The more countries, and that's why we're doing it in English as well, because we want to inspire other people in other countries to join the movement, to join the
breakaway.
Yeah.
So I guess that takes me to the next question, which was, so if you've seen that some countries have been breaking away from these agreements, are they setting precedents for potential lawsuits from big corporations, or have they not seen any backlash in that case? Because you're saying that the biggest consideration for governments to be under the boot of corporations with this ISDS clause is that they would get a big lawsuit, right? That they couldn't afford that bill, and that bill would, wreck an economy. So I'm wondering if there's been a precedent for that, like that a country has tried to do this and then they got, loaded with a lawsuit on top, or are we just talking hypotheticals here?
You mean that a country tries to exit ISDS and then gets a lawsuit for exiting ISDS?
Yeah, or just for breaking these contracts where they do a policy that isn't profitable for the companies that they have these agreements with.
Oh, there's so many lawsuits.
Yeah?
There are so many lawsuits.
Can you give me an example of like a case that would that had substantial numbers behind it? Like people can understand the scale.
Yeah, I mean, the cases, when you start looking at them, they're just so absurd. They're really like, so I can say Sweden, a Swedish company called Vattenfall sued Germany for putting down a nuclear power plant after Fukushima. So I think they sued for like 5 million euros, and they won 1.4 million euros. I think it was Shell. So this is another one. Shell in the Netherlands. They have one of the biggest gas fields in Groningen.
Yeah.
And they've been extracting gas since, I can't remember when, maybe the 70s. You'll have to double check that. And it's been leading to all of these earthquakes and destruction of homes. And, people have been so traumatized by it. So eventually the government enacted a policy that would prevent them from continuing that oil field. They sued Groningen, and I think they won. I'm not exactly sure, but they sued, and the lawsuit was really expensive. One of the craziest cases, actually, that I've heard about, and when I heard about this case, I was just like, this case should have just shut down the whole system. I don't know how not more people are talking about it.
Mm-hmm.
Was a case in Honduras when they had kind of a libertarian government. They decided to chisel off a part of the Honduras, which they call the ZEDE, a free trade zone. Basically, this is a little chiseled part of the country that would have different rules, very little taxes, and the president of this would be a CEO of a corporation. So an American company called Prospera came there, and they were, running their business in this little island that was not that was kind of unofficially not really a part of Honduras anymore because it was a free trade zone. It was exempt from regular rules. And they're starting these, AI experiments, like transhumanist experiments that have things that are not permitted to do in the United States, but they can do it here because there's no regulations. A while later, when there's a regime shift in the Honduras, they say, of course, we can't sell off a part of our country to a corporation. We need constitutional protection from this. So then they write in their constitution a protection from these free trade zones, and they get sued by Prospera, the American country, for 1/3 of their annual GDP. And I think that process is going on now.
So there's got to be an element here where the courts are also upholding these clauses. So they find that legally speaking, they are allowed. Is that what you're saying? So because otherwise, why would the companies win against, people and governments,
because
right?
They have the treaties. So there are special courts they're not national courts. There's these private courts.
Mm-hmm.
And in them, they're upholding the ISDS. I mean, it's a part of a binding treaty. So that the countries enter with each other.
So it's just like a contract between the countries, and because the contract gets breached, then they can sue for that.
They can sue for that.
Yeah, and then the courts uphold the contract.
The courts uphold, but there's also, it's kind of, they call them like a kangaroo court because they're so, like, the companies will appoint the lawyers by themselves. It's like private lawyers that the companies themselves appoint that make a lot of money from these cases. And there's also special corporations that invest in these cases. So it's like, it's really hard.
So they bribe the judges and things like this?
No,
or
not bribe the judges, but they will pay a corporation to pursue a case, because then they can make money if the corporation wins. And I was hearing the other day in London Climate Week, they had a panel about this, that there's no precedence in these cases. So even if a corporation loses a case, they can bring the same claim essentially again.
Like an appeal, or
no,
just
appeal. They can bring a very similar case again, and that those judges can come with a completely different answer. So
okay, so the precedent doesn't actually work, even if there was a precedent. Okay, I see. Maybe then let's switch a little into the other key elements or pillars of your initiative, one of which I felt particularly inclined to mention was accountability.
Yeah.
You talked about how accountability is a key pillar of your movement. In practical terms, though, what does holding power accountable look like? Like, what are you expecting as an outcome, as a successful outcome of this initiative when dealing with these large systems like governments, corporations, and global markets? What does that accountability look like?
Well, accountability is about not being able to extract resources, put people in slave-like working conditions without actually having to deal with the consequences of what you're doing. So in a system where we would have people actually seeing the impacts of what they're doing on the earth with their own eyes and their own hands, that's different than saying like, hey, we're this company that has we're registered in Bermuda. So we have our board there, but we have our industry over here. So we're not actually seeing the water that's being polluted. We're not seeing the people that are losing their jobs. We're not seeing the consequences of our actions. But if you would have corporations or companies that were place-based, so they have to be registered in a place with democratic rules that people are actually a part of creating, and not like we're registered in some tax haven and we have our industry over there, then there could be more democratic oversight. And I think this is something that is more a part of the whole localization movement. Our campaign is more focused on the free trade system and these clauses, but the localization movement is very much about, rather than continuing to deregulate and subsidize the global giants and making it easier for them to, roam around the earth and extract resources, we need to support the entrepreneurs, the farmers, the banks at a local level. But if you look at it today, for example, there's a Swedish bank called JAK, and it's a members owned bank. They have to follow the exact same rules that a global bank would.
Yeah.
And it's just like, so they basically have to have like a person working full time just to make sure they're following the rules. If they get one thing wrong, they get so scrutinized.
Yeah.
They try to have their bank interest free, but they weren't allowed to because it would be like unfair competition or something. So all the rules are set up to favor the global giants with things like tax-free status, with monopolies on seats and patents. Meanwhile, the things at the local level that are actually would be people that have eyes that see what's happening on the ground. That's what we mean with accountability. You actually have a relationship to what you're putting out in the world. But rather than having, I'll take an easy example, like if you have a town and you have a shop and a cafe and you have people that are meeting people and they're spending the money locally. But if you facilitate for something like Espresso House to come in, all the money is being forwarded up to somebody, to the wealth creation up here. And there's not these relationships that we're talking about that could happen at the local level, which strengthen the local level on like a human basis.
Mm-hmm. But when we talk about foreign policy, though, and a lot of this economic policy tends to go into foreign policy ground as well, we often are talking about a scale of detachment from the reality on the ground. So how are you planning to, or if that is a goal or not, I'm not sure, of your campaign, how do you plan to hold accountable the powers that are not close to the ground? Because those are the same ones that you're trying to maybe either take down or disable, or in the case of politicians, for example, influence in some way as a people-led movement. So how does accountability play a role there in making sure that those people who are maybe detached from the reality on the ground are held accountable?
Yeah, well, the first thing would be we need the policies that are being made to be made by those that are actually elected by the people. So we can't have CEOs of corporations having a say in which policies get made and which policies don't get made, because they're not elected by the people. So that's the first step. The second step is, this isn't something that's actually a part of our campaign, but what I'm thinking is that when you talk about decentralization of power, then you would give more mandate, more decisions to be made at a local level where people have more relationship to. There's a lot of a lot of people would say here in Sweden, we have more of a relationship to the politicians at the municipality level, the politicians at national level. You know, there's people feel so disconnected, but at the municipality level, you actually have medborgarmöten and more dialogue. So the more we can decentralize. One thing would be to say, okay, we have this global corporate regime. Why don't we create a global government? I don't think that would be such a good idea. So decentralizing power is actually giving the people that are affected by decisions on land, on money, on culture, should have a big say in the decisions that are being made, rather than, you know, people in boardrooms somewhere far away. So I guess it would be changing the amount of decisions that's made in EU level or national level and bringing it closer to home. In the north of Sweden, in Jämtland, they had this, I don't know if you've seen this documentary called Headwind.
No.
It's about a guy who's was in London banking, and he left because he felt like he was working with renewable investments, and he was just seeing how this is just green capitalism. I want to do something different. So he moved to the north of Sweden to be out in nature. And then, lo and behold, a little while later, they come with these huge wind power plants. And the whole local community goes together and say, we don't want you to remove the old forests we have here. We have a relationship to them. And at local level, they're saying basically you have no say to these people because this decision has been made higher up. So this renewable wind energy is going to be made. So then they, you know, cut down a whole lot of forests and put it, so people there have no say basically. So, you know, the importance in communities being very involved in determining the questions that affect them.
And I would like to give maybe a little bit of a pushback here, because some might say, I don't necessarily agree with them, but some might say that that's the Sweden we live in today. That the politicians, I understand that there's the ISDS clause and that plays a hold also on what policies get pushed. I'm not denying the effect of corporations, influence of corporations, but I'm saying also that many Swedes today believe that the decisions that they make at the voting, you know, ballot are actually then going to reflect policy. They believe that the politicians are representing them. So what would you say if to those people? Because I feel like if they're not,
I would actually counter that. I would say more and more people feel like politicians are not representing them. I would say that very clear statistics show that young people especially feel like politicians are not representing them, are showing that, you know, young people don't even really believe in democracy anymore. This is from a report that I read last year from MUCF. So
this is young people. You know, I'm talking about the average person in Sweden who goes to the voting ballot.
I think people vote because we understand that it could be catastrophic not to. But I also would probably think that more and more of us have this feeling that our politicians are not really representing us. They're listening to something else through, most people are aware of lobbying, right? Most people aren't aware of the ISDS and the free trade system. So I don't know if I agree with you that most people feel very represented by the politics.
Because wouldn't you think that if people don't feel that way, we would have already had an awakening? That people would have realized, that majority of people would have realized that the politicians are not serving them and they're not actually enacting policies that benefit them. And therefore, you know, maybe voter turnout wouldn't be so high and people would just be completely politically disengaged, if that's how we're measuring political engagement, just by voting alone. Because I'd like to believe that, people are super aware and that they're highly, you know, conscientious that the world we live in no longer reflects and represents, you know, their wishes as people on the ground. But I actually don't think that that's the reality, because, I mean, be it through media, be it through propaganda, be it through misleading information, people believe things that give them comfort. And if it's comforting that they believe the politicians are, covering their best interests and having their best interests in mind, they will vote for them, even if the policies don't reflect that. So I'm wondering, and I'm trying to push back here, and I'm wondering, how do you then kind of help this narrative of building the narrative of, if people don't yet believe that the politicians don't represent them.
I would just say, okay, we're living in a world that most people feel like we don't want anymore. How did we get here? We're told here in Sweden that we're so wealthy, we shouldn't complain. Look at the third world country. But are we really that wealthy? If you look at addiction levels, depression levels, do you know what the highest cause for death amongst young people is?
Suicide?
Suicide in Sweden. Is that the fabric of a functioning society? Most of us look outside our window. We also see the complete degradation of the earth we live on, the extinction of species. So it's like we can see that those in power are making decisions that are not leading to a society where many of us feel well, that are not leading to a society where the planet feels well. So many people feel isolated, and yet still we have faith in that the politics that's being run is a politics that's pro-life, that's leading to an economic system that is just. So it's kind of like, I think it's easy to dissociate from, because it's so overwhelming, the whole narrative of like a potential collapse. It's hard to take in. So I can understand that it's easier to dissociate and keep on,
So how do you aim to engage people? So for those who are dissociating, I mean, and I like to reiterate that I mostly agree with you. I'm just trying to understand, how do we engage these people? Because the truth is, I myself am Gen Z, and I'm exactly that way. Like, I'm disillusioned by power structures. I don't believe in institutions anymore, especially over the past 3 years of genocide and war and conflict. I just don't agree that international law is upheld to the same degree that I used to, right? Or that I was raised to believe so. But then it doesn't lead me to a nihilistic, perspective, but it actually doesn't give me any next step, any segue to potential action. It just leaves me with a lot of despair. So I'm wondering, how do we activate people, and especially young people? We're talking about young people feeling like we're always talking about raising awareness towards issues. But there's a point where information gap, like, we're beyond that. I personally believe, and I want to really push this, because yes, people are super unaware. Maybe they're also not entirely unaware, but they're unaware of the depth of the problem, as you're saying, or the depth of the whole of corporate, institutions. But at the same time, I'm like, people need a segue to action. If we don't talk about what is next, like, what is the alternative that we want to build, people just feel like, but then I can't do anything about it, or I'm hopeless, or I'm helpless. So for your initiative, what are some tangible economic or political actions that you're hoping to translate this urgency into? Because if it's just so we can move beyond this phase of like, I really do feel like we've been stuck in this for such a long time, like patting ourselves in the back if we're aware, but not actually leading into any action moving forward.
Well, so a few things. I would say, first of all, there is, even if people understand that, institutions and politicians have become unreliable and are disillusioned, I would say there's still a lacking awareness about this global system that functions like a machine. How it functions, how it's virtually fundamentally anti-life. It's all built on separation. Because once you see that, then you have a very, very concrete target that you need to immediately start regulating and instead subsidizing at the local level, so we can start building resilience at the local level. What I'm seeing also in the line of work that we're in all over the world, I'm seeing so beautiful initiatives, human scale economies that are being built by people, especially in the food sector. People are they're noticing, okay, what feels good? It's to be with other people. It's to feel connected. It's to feel like I have a connection to this earth that I'm walking on. I'm seeing it everywhere. I can name, Ghana Food Movement, Hans Salim, Reformaten here. There's so many of them, and it's just not visible to mainstream media, but all over the world, human scale economies are being brought forth by people that are basically saying, screw this, we're going to do something different. And that's so important and it's so empowering. And the best thing is that it's also healing. What happens to people when they get together with their hands in the dirt, start remembering how we've actually evolved as human beings for hundreds and thousands of years before we were removed from community, before we were removed from the earth, and also before this kind of like spiritual light in us has been so dimmed by this man-made artificial system. At local level, there's so many beautiful things happening. Unfortunately, it's not seen by everyone. But we also need to remember to address the system that's constantly interrupting these movements from flourishing. Against all odds, they are still flourishing. I see it with my own eyes, and I see how people are, regaining their faith in humanity when they're creating these kind of parallel structures. There's so many examples of it, you don't need to search that far and wide to find it. And I think ultimately it's about like realizing how the institutions we're in, everything from, the medicine to how we school our kids, put them in monocultures in classrooms between four walls with kids that are just their age, what we think about learning, that there's things that are so promoted by this industrial, specialized, narrow system that's just not working for us or for the planet anymore. And we're seeing alternatives being built. So I would just really encourage people to start thinking outside the box and following what we all feel in our gut, that there is another way. There is definitely another way. And this kind of history of humans, this history of industrial modernity, of global corporate, it's such a short period also of human history. So we have an image also that, before the West expanded and came with the trade and the modern education, our ancestors were living in darkness and were primitive, and it's kind of this a bit Christian thought where the white light was up there and the body and the senses and the earth were dirty. So we needed to progress this way. So I feel like we also have a lot of lessons to learn from, okay, what were our ancestors doing before they were interrupted by this very artificial system? Maybe it wasn't all bad. Maybe there are practices and ancestral memories in us that can give us information on how to move forward now.
So how do you hope you can engage people, be it skeptics like myself or be it others that feel alienated, disillusioned by the system? How do you hope you can engage them in this cause? Is it by sharing these stories and sharing stories of positive alternative, actions, or what are your goals with the movement?
It's to do both. It's to highlight localization as one of the pathways forward that we need to move towards, but also being very clear on what is most needed right now. One of the things that are really most needed right now is a very strong non-compliance standpoint from a broad majority of people, where we say, no, we don't consent anymore to this machine that is destroying all of life. We are pressuring our politicians to change the policies that keep on giving them power, that are now deregulating AI companies and giving them the right. It's easier to start an AI data center in the United States than it is to open a small shop.
Yeah.
Why are the rules set up like that? We don't accept it anymore. And we need politicians that are ready to wake up and really address this. So that's one thing. I think it's very political. At the same time, people need to see positive examples, like you're saying. We need to be reminded of what humans are capable of. We've always been capable of cooperation. The story of the survival of the fittest. I don't even think that was the way Charles Darwin intended it. He, when in his book, he talks about the entanglement of all of life. So I think we need to have new narratives about we don't have this economic man that's self-interested and that, all of these stories about the invisible hand of the market. We need new stories. We need new narratives. We need a spiritual awakening. And I think humans are so ready for this, to do it together as well, as a we, not as a, individual yogi in the studio.
Yeah, makes sense. So because of the power of these stories and highlighting positive examples of how we can bring localization to our communities, is this the reason why you've decided to partner with Gustaf Skarsgård and with other, for example, the Fund Your Mother, film association? Is this why you're trying to engage different stakeholders to try to really get them to contribute to the storytelling and the narrative building? Or what are their role, and why are you engaging other members of civic society in all of this?
Well, because we're stronger together. The more, the merrier. Anybody that's willing to really step up and talk about this, anybody with a platform that has some kind of dignity and is saying, okay, I want to use my platform to make a real difference, we'd love to collaborate with, because we want to reach far and wide so that we can actually create a broad movement to really take ourselves out of this grip of this global corporate empire that is, shaping our politics, shaping our relationship to the earth, shaping our view of ourselves, what is normal, what is desirable, how we relate to one another. So we're so happy that people are wanting to collaborate with us. We want more. We're actually trying to build a coalition of civil society organizations now that are willing to do as they did in Colombia, to write this joint statement that we will send to people in academia and then use.
So you're trying to follow the same path to exit this
ISDS, yes.
Mm-hmm. So that's the first step. So that's like an actionable first step. What would be the long-term goal? Like, when would you say our mission has been accomplished?
I don't know.
You don't know. You're in this for the long run.
Yeah. It's kind of like, I don't even know what the world is going to look like in 2 years. We have a rat race by a few men to create artificial general intelligence. And in a way, I feel also like it doesn't matter. Some people are like, do you have hope? Do you not have hope? And what I would say is, if I saw someone I loved walking down the street and they're about to get hit by a car, I wouldn't stop and say, do I have hope? Do I not? I would throw myself because I love that person if it were my child. And that's kind of what I feel about, us and the earth. I don't know how things are going to go, but I feel like at my deathbed, I'm going to be happy that I did something.
You did what you could.
Also unknowing. It's not like, you're asking me and giving me pushbacks, but I don't have all the answers. I'm also just following the breadcrumbs and trying to listen to my intuition. So hopefully, but I do see this ISDS and the free trade system really like a key
to unlock the rest of the impact that I guess you're trying to achieve here. My last question here is about, and feel free to also touch on any other points that we haven't discussed yet. But my last question was about the elections that we have coming up in September, and how now that you're bringing a lot of awareness towards this specific clause and this specific issue of the globalized economy, trying to make it, make sense for local Swedes and also people outside of Sweden. Do you foresee any effects or impacts of your campaign on the electoral environment? Have you already seen any positive, effects, or are you hoping more for like a ripple effect at the EU level, or what is, given the scope of your first petition specifically, like what are you hoping to achieve?
Many of the parties have, sat their agenda, their like politiska valfrågor a while ago. So I don't see that before September we would be able to affect the outcome of the elections. I don't see any politician that's bringing this, that's, taking this to heart yet.
Have you spoken to any of them?
Yeah, I spoke to some at the Miljöpartiet, and they're still very, engaged with the free trade energy charters, and they have this kind of quite mainstream view of sustainability, if you ask me. So I feel like we need more time
to bring them.
We don't have any goal in mind that we will affect the coming elections.
Politically, yeah. So if it will take time and people need to stay engaged and stay activated, are there any events or gatherings that you are hoping to put on coming up? I mean, I went to one of them a couple weeks ago, so I'm wondering, and is it going to be both in English and Swedish? So we have our audience is like 50% Swedish and the other 50% is pretty international. So I'm wondering what we can recommend and what's coming up on your agenda, so we can put in the plug here.
Yeah, we're actually in the midst of planning it right now. I can't say anything at the moment because everything is still in the planning, but I'd say to sign up for our newsletter, which you can find through our social media, and everything will be on there. But there are a few things happening in September and October this year. Yeah, that's all I can say for
All right. So, and for them to find you, the best way would be either your website or you said your newsletter, but also Instagram, I'm assuming.
So to find the newsletter, you'd go into our Instagram, _, and then there's a link to a link tree where you'll find our newsletter and website.
Perfect. We'll be plugging all of that in. So I'd like to just finish up by asking you, what keeps you motivated? Because I always think that when I speak to people in these social justice activist spaces, everyone has a different why they got involved, why they got engaged to begin with. But I'm assuming it's also, especially if you're in this for the long term, you're not just trying to get this one policy key action in place. You're trying to really make this a consistent thing. What is something that keeps you motivated and I guess keeps you sane? That's more my question, because I think I always try to take inspiration from people that I meet that are working in these things, because it's difficult to keep going.
Yeah. Well, I'd say that's quite existential for me.
Is it?
So, well, after I studied, I really came to a place of like, who am I? Why am I here? What are we all doing here? And I guess it started somewhat of an inward journey for me, where I started asking questions of like, how do I want to show up? What feels important? How do I live a dignified life? How do I want to treat other people? What is my relationship to the earth that is my mother? And when you start asking all of these questions in contemplation, you'll find that you have answers within yourself. And so I try to follow those. Ultimately, I feel like there is this still small voice within us all that kind of prompts us to do things. And you can see when you make certain decisions, how does that feel for you? When you make other decisions, how does that feel for you? And I try to follow that which feels right, from many different perspectives. And also just noticing how good it feels to live a life where I have certain, let's say, qualities that I value, like wanting to act in a way that is just towards others. And it's not just like self-flagellation, like, oh, I need to be fair, but it feels good. How does it feel when I talk shit about that person? Or how does it feel when I talk respectful? How does it feel when I stand up for something and I'm courageous? And how does it feel when I shut my voice down? So I guess that's...
So listening to your inner voice.
Because, and that's, for me, that's also a political place. It's not a place that's shut off from the rest of the world. It's like this spiritual life in the Himalayas. It's in relationship to everything else. So, yeah.
Do you have any advice or any words of wisdom for young people, especially who are out there and maybe looking to get engaged in this type of cause or movement or starting their own thing? Do you have any thoughts that you'd like to share with them?
Yes, it's easier together. When you don't, it's loneliness is really such a epidemic. So getting together with other people where you can actually also share the grief you feel, because it's not easy being a human being, the grief and the sorrow, and being able to really connectly and feel deeply seen by others, and feel like it's a basic human need to feel like you belong somewhere. And this system that we live in makes that so difficult. So I'd say being able to be vulnerable with other people, discuss what matters, address, all of us, the pain we feel and the grief we feel, release some of it in a safe space so that we can take action.
Okay. Wow. Yeah, that's great. Great advice. I want to thank you again, Fatima. That was really inspiring. And I think that in a lot of ways, I got to understand a little bit better what you do and what your initiative is all about. So I'm hoping that our audience will also grow and learn to be curious about it and potentially go and seek more information or attend one of your future events. I mean, that's always a goal, to bring from the digital to the physical, because I also believe like through human to human, like direct physical interaction, that's how you build, bonds and connection between people. So I definitely think that that's the way a movement should go. So I want to thank you for being a guest here on Somewhere in Stockholm. I'm not sure if you have any other final thoughts or final, impressions that you'd like to leave about your movement or how people can find you. But yeah, the floor is yours if you'd like to share anything else.
Not really. Just thank you also for the work you're doing and using your platform to raise awareness about what you think is important. So.
Yeah. I tried to listen to my voice, like you're saying, like, if I care about something and I care about an issue and I see other people are trying to, bring about action in some way, I want to highlight that. And I want to focus on platforming also those people if I can, if in any way I can help. I mean, I think that's also the least that I can do. I have this sentiment towards the work as well. So yeah, thank you so much. Thank you. Thank you for being here. And thank you everyone for listening and just having some time to check out this podcast. So we've been Frankie and Fatima Osman Abdalla. Thank you so much, Fatima, again for being here. And until the next one, please feel free to subscribe, check out our other videos. We always interview guests from all around Stockholm region that have interesting projects and initiatives that you may not know about, but maybe you should know about, and go and check out. And for all the links that were mentioned today, I will be linking them in the description box, so you'll be able to access all of those resources later on. So thank you, and until next time, I'll see you around. Hej då!
Lost my backbone. Somewhere in Stockholm.
I wanted to live you need to do this, you need to have that, you need to marry, you need to have kids. The pressure of the society, people are thinking this way, I don't like it. And then I went to Erasmus and I saw that I can still do whatever I want to do and go with the flow, try and experience life more.
I think that's the best kind of environment to really force yourself to be uncomfortable. It's a situation of discomfort, and that's where you grow the most.
Erasmus is well known and is the greatest investment in people by European Union.